Have you noticed how there are certain days that seem ordinary on the calendar, yet somehow carry the weight of an entire season of your life? Today is one of those days. And I want you to stay with me, because what is unfolding is not something I say lightly. Over the past several weeks, I have been carefully watching the sky assemble this exact pattern piece by piece, and now that everything has finally fallen into place, I truly believe many of you are about to experience something you never expected. On this day, July 24th, Mercury forms an exact sextile with Venus. Mercury stands at 16 degrees Cancer, while Venus reaches 16 degrees Virgo, and the aspect becomes exact at noon. Within astrology, this alignment has often been described as a love portal. I understand why that phrase can sound exaggerated, and I know many people dismiss it before looking any deeper. But this particular configuration deserves more than a passing glance. When you examine the timing, the precision of the geometry, and especially the dramatic contrast between the emotional terrain we have been walking through and the doorway this aspect now creates, it becomes much easier to understand why so many astrologers have been counting down to this moment. This is not simply a pleasant afternoon where conversations happen to feel smoother, or people suddenly become a little kinder. The energy suggests something far more meaningful. It speaks of barriers that have resisted movement for weeks, perhaps even much longer, finally beginning to soften. It points toward a moment when what once felt impossible suddenly becomes reachable. For 3 zodiac signs in particular, this day carries the symbolism of a long-awaited message finally finding its destination. It may be words you have desperately hoped to hear. It may be clarity you have searched for without success. It may be a realization that quietly changes the direction of everything that follows. If you have recently carried an invisible heaviness, almost as though an emotional weight has been pressing against your heart without explanation, then what you are feeling has a story behind it. Perhaps there has been an important conversation living inside you, one you have rehearsed repeatedly in your mind, yet every attempt to express it seemed to dissolve before the words ever reached another person. That frustration did not happen by accident. There has been a deeper astrological process shaping those experiences, and before we can fully appreciate why today feels so powerful, we have to understand everything that prepared us for it. The significance of this day cannot be separated from the difficult journey that came before it. In many ways, the relief emerging now only makes sense because of everything this month demanded from us. If July has felt emotionally exhausting, mentally overwhelming, or strangely unstable within your closest relationships, your perception has not been distorted. The intensity has been real. This month has tested resilience again and again, and recognizing that sequence allows today's energy to reveal its true meaning. Looking back, the chain of events began on July 4th, when Mars formed its conjunction with Uranus in Gemini. That combination is famous for unleashing sudden disruption, unpredictable developments, and dramatic changes that arrive without warning. Plans that once appeared secure could unravel almost overnight. Circumstances could shift before anyone had time to prepare. Because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury happened to be retrograde during this period, our ability to understand, organize, and mentally process those shocks became significantly more difficult. It was almost as though life kept changing direction, while every internal compass stopped working at the same time. Unexpected situations emerged from every angle, yet the clarity needed to navigate them seemed frustratingly out of reach. Perhaps you have looked back over this month, wondering why everything appeared to happen so quickly, while your own mind struggled to keep pace. That sensation has been shared by many, and I have certainly recognized it within my own experience as well. Then another layer was added on July 7th, when Neptune stationed retrograde in Aries. As if uncertainty had not already become overwhelming, this shift reached even deeper into our perception, making certainty feel increasingly difficult to hold on to. Questions multiplied, while clear answers became harder to trust. Just when it seemed impossible for the emotional landscape to grow more unstable, July 13th arrived, with Venus forming a square to Uranus. If relationships suddenly felt unpredictable during that period, or financial circumstances delivered surprising twists, that alignment reflected exactly those experiences. It functioned almost like an examination of stability, asking whether the structures we depended upon were genuinely secure or merely appeared strong until pressure revealed their weaknesses. Throughout every one of these developments, another influence quietly continued shaping the emotional atmosphere. Mercury remained retrograde in Cancer. Rather than allowing thoughts to move confidently toward the future, the mind kept returning to unfinished chapters. Conversations you believed were over resurfaced unexpectedly. Feelings you assumed had already healed returned with surprising intensity. Family memories, emotional habits, and relationship patterns refused to remain in the past. Instead, they demanded fresh attention. Communication became increasingly complicated. Thoughts felt tangled before they could become sentences. Many people found themselves fully aware of what they wished to express, while simultaneously feeling incapable of finding language that accurately reflected those emotions. That silent struggle created enormous internal pressure. It was not simply frustration with communication. It became the exhausting experience of carrying truths that seemed impossible to articulate. That emotional build-up has been accumulating throughout the month, and today represents the point where that pressure finally begins to release. The reason everything changes now begins with what occurred yesterday. Because on July 23rd, Mercury stationed direct at 16 degrees Cancer. After spending weeks moving backward through the Zodiac, Mercury finally came to a complete stop before beginning its forward motion once again. Astrologically, that shift is significant, but psychologically, it may be even more profound. Throughout this retrograde, your thinking has not followed its usual patterns. Cancer approaches life through emotion, memory, intuition, and personal history rather than detached logic. When Mercury travels backward through Cancer, ordinary retrograde themes such as misunderstandings and technological inconveniences become only part of the story. The deeper process involves revisiting emotional experiences you believed were finished. Old relationship dynamics return. Family wounds reappear. Memories once carefully placed aside suddenly asked to be understood from a completely different perspective. Instead of simply remembering the past, you have been emotionally living inside it again, preparing for the breakthrough that this Mercury and Venus sextile now makes possible. And that unfolding story becomes even more meaningful as we continue into what comes next. There comes a point during every difficult season when you suddenly realize the struggle was never only about surviving what was happening around you. It was about uncovering something hidden so deeply inside yourself that ordinary life could never have revealed it. That is exactly what Mercury's retrograde through Cancer has been doing. Instead of allowing your thoughts to move confidently toward the future, your mind has been excavating forgotten emotional landscapes, carefully uncovering memories, conversations, and unresolved feelings that had been buried beneath years of routine. Rather than serving as the part of you that builds plans and calculates your next move, your thinking has become something much more intimate. It has resembled an archaeological expedition into your own emotional history, exposing layers of yourself that you may not have intended to revisit. Then, in the middle of that entire process, on July 12th, an extraordinary astrological moment quietly unfolded. Mercury reached an exact conjunction with the Sun, an event astrologers recognize as a kazimai. I believe this marked the emotional center of the entire retrograde. It was the instant when the deepest truth finally stepped out of the shadows. For some of you, that realization centered on a relationship that suddenly looked very different than it had before. For others, it revealed needs that had gone ignored for far too long. Some finally recognized an emotional pattern that had repeated throughout their lives without ever fully understanding why it kept returning. Whatever form that realization took, it arrived with unmistakable clarity. Yet despite finally seeing the truth, You were unable to move forward with it. Mercury was still traveling backward, preventing insight from becoming action. You possessed the answer, but the bridge between understanding and expression simply was not available yet. That has been the emotional burden of these past 2 weeks. It has felt as though your heart already knew exactly what needed to be spoken, while your voice remained trapped behind an invisible wall. The truth existed inside you, fully formed, yet every attempt to communicate it seemed incomplete or impossible. Now the atmosphere begins to change. Mercury has stationed direct. The emotional haze that clouded your thinking begins to dissolve. Thoughts that once felt scattered slowly reorganize themselves into language that finally reflects what you have truly been feeling. Almost immediately after this station, Mercury forms its exact sextile with Venus. The symbolism could hardly be more meaningful. The planet governing thought, communication, and perception reaches into harmonious dialogue with the planet representing affection, connection, beauty, and the heart. Suddenly, the realization born during the retrograde no longer has to remain silent. It can finally be expressed with sincerity, grace, and emotional intelligence. The sequence of these events feels remarkably intentional. The revelation came first. The ability to communicate it arrives only after Mercury resumes forward motion. Together they create an unfolding story that feels less like coincidence and more like perfect timing, written into the larger rhythm of the sky. Yet there is another reason this day carries such extraordinary emotional weight. And when I first mapped these planetary movements together, it genuinely stopped me in my tracks. The miracle of today is defined not only by the opportunity it offers, but also by the outcome it narrowly prevents. Throughout the second half of July, Saturn has remained almost motionless in Aries, as it prepares to station retrograde on July 26th. Saturn in Aries carries unmistakable gravity. It represents restriction, resistance, discipline, and the uncomfortable demand to prove yourself before receiving the reward you seek. It often feels like the internal voice that questions your worth, delays your progress, or convinces you that every important door is about to close before you ever reach it. While Mercury continued its backward journey through Cancer, it slowly approached what could have become an exact superior square with that nearly stationary Saturn. Within traditional astrology, this is considered one of the most difficult configurations for communication, emotional progress, and psychological momentum. Had that aspect reached perfection, the entire energetic tone of this week would have shifted dramatically. Instead of conversations finding healing, they could have encountered rejection. Instead of opportunities reopening, they might have ended permanently. Relationships could have reached barriers that seemed impossible to cross. Communication might have become even more restrictive than it already was. But something remarkable happened. The square never became exact. Mercury slowed its motion and stationed direct at 16 degrees and 18 minutes of Cancer. Saturn remained positioned at 14 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries. Mercury stopped only 1½ degrees before completing that difficult aspect. It approached the edge without crossing it. Just before stepping into the full force of Saturn's restriction, it reversed direction. Then, almost immediately afterward, Mercury entered this exact harmonious sextile with Venus. Symbolically, it feels as though Mercury was gently guided away from one path and welcomed onto another entirely. It is almost as though Venus extended a steady hand at precisely the moment Mercury was preparing to enter a far more difficult experience. If you have recently carried an unexplained feeling that something painful was about to happen, if you found yourself expecting rejection, fearing an impossible conversation, or quietly preparing for an ending that never arrived, that emotional anticipation may have reflected Saturn's approaching influence. The remarkable shift today is that this expected heaviness begins to dissolve. The feared rejection fails to materialize. The final door remains open. Instead of cold resistance, a softer, more supportive current begins to take its place. That striking difference between what nearly unfolded and what actually becomes reality is one of the strongest reasons this day feels like the opening of an entirely new chapter. Understanding why this particular sextile carries so much significance also requires looking beyond the simple definition of the aspect itself. A sextile is a harmonious 60-degree relationship between two planets, encouraging cooperation, opportunity, and natural flow. These aspects occur regularly throughout the year, so, on the surface, there would appear to be nothing especially unusual about another Mercury and Venus sextile. What elevates this one is the extraordinary context surrounding it. First comes the timing. This alignment forms only hours after Mercury stations direct, when the planet's symbolism becomes exceptionally concentrated. A stationed planet functions almost like a magnifying lens, intensifying every quality it represents. In Mercury's case, thought, communication, understanding, learning, and meaningful conversation all become dramatically amplified. The ability of this sextile to restore connection becomes far more powerful because Mercury is operating at maximum symbolic intensity. Yet there is another layer that makes this configuration even more compelling. Traditional astrology teaches a principle known as reception. During this alignment, Venus occupies Virgo, the zodiac sign ruled by Mercury. In symbolic terms, Venus is visiting Mercury's own home. When Venus forms this harmonious sextile back toward Mercury, Mercury receives her warmly, offering support, stability, and cooperation. Rather than two planets merely exchanging energy across the sky, this becomes an interaction built upon familiarity, welcome, and mutual understanding. That subtle technical detail strengthens the emotional meaning of the entire aspect, creating the sense that both the mind and the heart are finally prepared to work together instead of pulling in opposite directions. And that harmony becomes the foundation for everything that unfolds next. What makes this alignment so extraordinary is the way every piece of it begins working together as though it were completing a circuit that has remained unfinished until this very moment. Mercury, now standing in deeply emotional Cancer, carries every realization, every vulnerable memory, and every hidden truth that surfaced during the retrograde. Instead of allowing those discoveries to remain trapped inside your heart, this sextile directs them toward Venus in Virgo, where emotion is translated into something useful, dependable, and real. Feelings no longer drift without direction. They become language. That language develops intention. Then that intention transforms into love, expressed through consistent actions rather than empty promises. This is not the kind of romantic energy that survives on fantasy or fleeting excitement. It represents devotion that proves itself through ordinary moments, thoughtful choices, and genuine presence. That is why the concept of a love portal feels appropriate here. The significance is not found simply because two planets occupy a harmonious angle. Its real strength comes from the way they actively support one another. Mercury offers understanding, while Venus provides practical expression. Together they create an energetic exchange, where each planet strengthens the other, allowing the heart and the mind to cooperate instead of competing for control. That mutual support produces something neither planet could accomplish independently. Because of that, the conversations taking place under this influence carry unusual emotional importance. They are not pleasant only for the moment. They plant something that continues growing long after the words have been spoken. Their impact reaches beneath the surface because they are built upon honesty that has already survived a long period of reflection. While everyone can benefit from this remarkable shift, there are three zodiac signs standing closest to the center of its influence. If your birth chart contains significant placements in Cancer, Virgo, or Taurus, especially your sun, moon, or rising sign, this alignment may feel particularly personal. For these signs, the energy does not simply pass through the background. It arrives directly, carrying the message they have unknowingly been preparing to receive. Beginning with Cancer, this is the moment when silence finally gives way to expression. If you are a Cancer rising or possess strong Cancer placements, Mercury has spent this entire retrograde traveling through your first house, the part of the chart connected with identity, self-perception, and the way you experience yourself. Because of that, the confusion of recent weeks has reached far beyond ordinary communication problems. It has touched the very foundation of who you believe yourself to be. There may have been moments when your own reflection seemed strangely unfamiliar, as though your inner truth and your outward expression had somehow drifted apart. Throughout this month, you have been engaged in profound inner work, whether you consciously recognized it or not. You have questioned how you present yourself to others. You have reconsidered what you genuinely require within your closest relationships. You have examined the ways your past experiences continue shaping how you reveal your emotions in the present. That process has been emotionally demanding because each time you attempted to explain your heart, your words seemed unable to carry the full weight of what you meant. Sometimes they emerged awkwardly. Other times they never emerged at all. Today marks the turning point. Mercury, moving direct within your first house, releases pressure that has quietly accumulated for weeks. Then the exact sextile reaches Venus in your third house, the house governing communication, messages, conversations, and daily interactions. Suddenly, your identity and your voice become connected again. Everything you have struggled to express now discovers a clear path into the world. Because Venus occupies practical Virgo, the response you receive is unlikely to be uncertain or superficial. Instead, it carries sincerity, stability, and reassurance. Someone may reveal through thoughtful words or meaningful actions that they have noticed the details you believed everyone overlooked. If you have spent weeks questioning whether anyone truly understood you, today offers the possibility that someone has been paying far closer attention than you ever imagined. Remember this, if the message reaches you. Your emotions have never been excessive. Your sensitivity has never been a weakness. You have simply been waiting for someone capable of understanding the language your heart has always spoken. Whether you discover that person today or they unexpectedly discover you, the connection carries lasting significance. For Virgo, this alignment unfolds in an entirely different but equally meaningful way. If you are a Virgo rising or Virgo sun, Venus is currently moving through your first house, naturally increasing your personal presence and drawing attention towards you. There is something unusually attractive surrounding your energy right now, even if you remain completely unaware of it yourself. In many ways, that perfectly reflects Virgo's nature. Other people often recognize your gifts long before you allow yourself to believe they exist. Yet despite this increased magnetism, another influence has complicated the experience. Your ruling planet Mercury has been retrograde within your 11th house, the area associated with friendships, communities, social circles, shared aspirations, and long-term dreams. As a result, while your personal energy has become increasingly appealing, your social world has struggled to reflect that reality. Misunderstandings with friends may have created unnecessary distance. Uncertainty may have developed regarding your place within important groups. Some of you may even have wondered why the people you expected to support you seemed unusually quiet or emotionally unavailable. The contradiction has been difficult to ignore. On one side, your confidence has quietly grown. On the other, meaningful connection has felt frustratingly out of reach. Today finally brings those separate experiences back together. Mercury stations direct inside your 11th house and immediately forms its harmonious sextile with Venus occupying your first house. That alignment reconnects your personal presence with the people surrounding you. The interference that has delayed communication begins to disappear. Confusion gives way to understanding. For many Virgos, the message arriving now is not simply affection, it is recognition. It is unmistakable confirmation that your value has been seen, appreciated, and remembered even during the moments when you quietly questioned whether anyone truly noticed at all. And that realization becomes the foundation for everything that unfolds next. For many of you born under Virgo influences, the message may arrive through someone already standing within your everyday world. It could come from a trusted friend, a co-worker, a familiar face you interact with often, or even someone whose feelings have quietly existed beneath the surface without either of you fully acknowledging them. What makes this moment unforgettable is not simply that they finally speak. It is what they choose to say. At last, someone recognizes the value of everything you have been giving. They acknowledge your presence instead of only appreciating your usefulness. They see the person behind the effort. For a sign that instinctively finds fulfillment by helping others, receiving that kind of recognition can feel surprisingly unfamiliar. Your first impulse may be to minimize the compliment, redirect the attention, or convince yourself they are exaggerating. Resist that instinct. Allow those words to reach the place inside you that has quietly wondered whether anyone truly understood your contribution. This is not empty praise. It is the universe reflecting back something you have spent a long time earning. Accepting that recognition becomes just as important as receiving it, because this alignment asks you to experience what it feels like to be supported, instead of always being the one offering support. Then we arrive at Taurus, and in many ways this sign experiences the most traditionally romantic expression of everything this portal represents. If you are a Taurus rising or Taurus sun, Mercury in Cancer is traveling through your third house, the realm connected with conversations, written messages, letters, everyday communication, and short journeys. At the same time, Venus in Virgo illuminates your fifth house, the part of the chart associated with romance, dating, creativity, pleasure, and heartfelt joy. Consider how naturally these two houses begin speaking to one another under this exact sextile. One governs communication, the other governs love. When the planet responsible for words forms a perfect harmonious aspect with the planet representing affection while directly linking these two areas of your chart, the symbolism becomes remarkably clear. A meaningful message may finally arrive. An honest romantic conversation may unfold. An invitation capable of changing the emotional direction of your life may suddenly appear. The astrological symbolism almost seems to describe itself. Yet what gives this experience even greater significance is the way Taurus approaches matters of the heart. You rarely rush into emotional commitments. Trust develops gradually. You open your heart only after stability has proven itself over time. Security always comes before surrender. That careful rhythm is one of your greatest strengths. But during Mercury's retrograde, it also became one of your greatest frustrations. The certainty you needed simply was not available. Conversations felt incomplete. Messages carried mixed meanings. Signals appeared inconsistent, making every possible step forward feel uncertain. You wanted clarity before making an emotional investment, yet clarity refused to arrive. That waiting period has likely felt much longer than the calendar suggests, because uncertainty weighs heavily on your spirit. Today, that waiting finally begins to end. The communication that reaches you, whether it arrives as a heartfelt confession, unmistakable confirmation, or an invitation carrying genuine emotional intention, provides the reassurance you have quietly been searching for. It offers the missing information that finally allows your heart to relax. Because Venus occupies Virgo, it also creates a beautiful trine with your natural Taurus energy, making this experience feel deeply authentic. The comfort you receive is not merely intellectual, it settles into your entire being. Your instincts recognize it before your thoughts fully catch up. Your body senses the truth alongside your mind. The uncertainty that has quietly accompanied you throughout recent weeks begins dissolving, replaced by warmth, stability, and the comforting feeling that something genuine is finally taking root. What emerges now carries the potential to endure, because it is built upon clarity rather than assumption. As meaningful as today's developments may be, I believe it would be a mistake to view this moment as the conclusion of the story. It is far more accurate to see it as the bridge leading toward everything that follows. Several powerful astrological events remain ahead before this month reaches its conclusion. The Sun entered Leo on July 22nd, introducing an entirely new creative and expressive current. The lunar nodes prepare to shift into Aquarius and Leo on July 27th, marking an important collective transition. Saturn stations retrograde on July 26th, bringing renewed attention to long-term structures, responsibility, and personal accountability. Then, on July 29th, a powerful full moon in Aquarius rises, carrying themes that ask something meaningful from all of us on a collective level. The closing days of this month, therefore, hold remarkable intensity. Significant structural changes continue approaching, both personally and collectively. That is exactly why today's emotional breakthrough matters so deeply. The clarity arriving through Mercury and Venus is not simply a beautiful experience designed to make this single day feel special. It functions as preparation. It is as though the universe is offering you one final opportunity to bring your heart and your mind into complete agreement before a larger wave of transformation arrives. The emotional stability you establish today becomes the ground beneath your feet. The conversation finally spoken, the truth finally expressed, the message finally received, or the understanding finally accepted, all become the foundation supporting you during the changes still approaching. Rather than treating today's blessings casually, honor them for what they truly represent. If your heart has something important to express, allow those words to leave your lips. If life places an unexpected message before you, receive it without immediately questioning whether you deserve it. The emotional security created today may become exactly what steadies you when the final movements of this month begin reshaping the landscape around you. Before we finish, there is one additional layer to today's astrology that deserves careful attention because it reveals something essential about how this portal actually works. Alongside the exact sextile, several smaller aspects also reach perfection on July 24th. Most importantly, both Mercury and Venus simultaneously form challenging angles with Chiron, the wounded healer. That detail changes the emotional texture of everything we have discussed. It reminds us that this portal is not designed to avoid discomfort. Instead, it invites healing through vulnerability. The words arriving today may first touch an old wound before they soothe it. They may awaken memories you believed had already faded. They may expose emotions you have carefully protected from the outside world. If that happens, do not mistake the temporary discomfort for a sign that something has gone wrong. In many cases, it signals exactly the opposite. Genuine healing rarely appears by avoiding what hurts. It often begins the moment another person is finally allowed to witness the part of you that has remained hidden. And instead of responding with criticism or rejection, they answer with patience, understanding, and compassion. If today's conversations unexpectedly fill your eyes with tears or leave your heart feeling unusually exposed, allow yourself to remain present with those emotions. That openness is not weakness. It is the doorway through which healing enters. The vulnerability required today is simply the price of reaching the peace waiting beyond it, and I sincerely believe what exists on the other side is worth every moment of courage it asks from you. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If these insights have reflected your own experience, if you have felt the emotional pressure that has defined this month, and if you sense that something meaningful is finally beginning to shift, I truly appreciate your support by subscribing to the channel. Your encouragement means more than you may realize. As this portal opens today, take gentle care of yourself, trust the wisdom that has been unfolding within you, and have the courage to step through the opportunity now standing before you. I look forward to sharing the next chapter of this journey with you very soon.